I love a good smoothie. We have big bags of frozen fruit, blueberries, strawberries, mangoes, fresh pineapples whenever we can. Of course, bananas, either fresh or frozen. A good smoothie, it seems like you can put almost anything in. Some people even put avocados in smoothies. I still don't understand that, but they say it's good anyway. It seems like whatever you put in the blender, what comes out is always good. However, when it comes to relationships and people, it doesn't always work that way. Join us today on When We Talk for the blending. Hello, friends, and welcome to When We Talk. I'm Stephen Conway, and this is my lovely wife,
Hello,
Tamara.
hello.
And we're so glad that you've joined us today because when we talk, we process.
Yes, and when we talk a lot.
And when we talk, we grow.
Yes, and listen, when we talk, we want to heal, y'all, okay?
Yes, so today on When We Talk, our title is The Blending.
Yes.
The Blending. And we're talking about a growing phenomenon. Actually, it's probably always existed. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll see that as we,
Yeah.
as we continue to talk,
Yeah.
that it has always existed, but it's a growing phenomenon in our society
Yes.
today. What is it that we're talking about?
The blended family.
A blended
Yeah.
family. What does it mean, a blended family?
Blended family can be a mother, right, or a father who remarries, right? Maybe they've been divorced and they remarry and they have children, or maybe the blended family could be a widower, who has lost a spouse and they end up marrying and that person has children, or it could be grandparents even, right? Sharing responsibilities of caring for a child with maybe perhaps the child's parent. There's various different aspects of how this blended family situation can actually show up.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when we say that the number of blended families
Yes.
is growing, what do we mean when we say that?
So the Pew Research actually suggests that 16%, and this was back probably in like 2015, so we're living in 2020 now, so I'm imagining that it's even much more.
Okay.
So 16% of children in the United States are growing up in blended families.
Right, blended family homes. Wow.
Yeah.
So what are some of the struggles of growing up in a blended family?
The struggles. Well, first of all, we will let you know that we both actually come from blended
Yes,
families,
blended
right?
families.
Hey, all right?
Both of us.
We are products of blended families, and while it's been a blessing, God has been good to us, there have been some struggles.
Yes.
We can say that. We can tell the truth. Shame the devil, okay? And there are some things that can come up in the blended family. When it comes to blended families, you are bringing literally, much like marriage, right? When two people get married, they're bringing two families together. Well, you're doing pretty much the same thing, when you choose to marry or be together, or operate on raising children with another individual. Because like we said, grandparents can do this too, or people who have taken on custody of children who are probably not originally their own, and they have to learn how to work with, compromise with another individual in order for the raising and the growth of that child.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about this topic, and when we talk, there's so much that the Bible actually addresses. And way back in the book of Genesis,
Yeah.
we run into a blended family.
One of the first blended
Yes,
families.
absolutely, with Abram, whose name would later become Abraham, and his wife Sarah. And of course, there was Hagar, and the children were Ishmael and Isaac.
Yeah.
And then later on down the line, of course, there's Jacob, and he had all type of stuff going on in his situation.
Ah, yes, Lord.
So the concept of blended family, it exists even in Scripture. And one of the things that we find is jealousy. Jealousy exists, favoritism.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Or we could say jealousy that's born out of favoritism. right? These are some of the things that exist. How do I, if I'm a part of a blended family, how do I treat children that are not biologically mine? How do I treat them the same as children who are biologically mine?
Now, there are probably some people who are listening to this conversation, and that's a real question, right? First of all, how do we confront the reality of that? I know there are some people who will watch and say, nope, I treat them like I don't have any differences. I love them the same. I don't even understand what that's about, right? And yet there may be some people who will say, well, yeah, it does feel kind of different. One of the things I think is very important, and we've shared this before, it's okay to tell the truth, right? And what I mean by telling the truth is you can tell the truth in love, right? That there is a difference sometimes, in how you interact with a child that maybe already has a father in their life, already has a mother in their life that loves them and cares for them. The idea that you have to replace an individual, that's an interesting thought. We'll probably talk about that later.
Yeah, and the other thing, just back on that point that you made, I may feel like, oh, I'm there, everybody's the same with me, and that's how I may feel. But one of the conversations we don't have when we talk is we don't often ask the children what their experience is. So I may feel like I've done a great job, but what I haven't done is I haven't asked the children what their experience has been growing up in this home. Did you feel like there was favoritism? Did you feel like there was a difference or anything like that?
And, we've talked about this in previous episodes. Why are we afraid to ask children these questions? Why do you think that we're hesitant to involve them in the process of?
Well, I know why we're hesitant. Because we're afraid they're going to say, yes, there was favoritism. Yes, I did not feel that everyone was equally treated. And so it's easier for me to live in my own reality bubble than it is for me to actually engage people in truth telling and ask them what their experience has been. And so, yeah, I don't want to be a person who has faults that other people have seen and experienced and lived through and with.
Yeah. And I also, what comes to my mind too is, let's say that does happen. Let's say a child expresses their thoughts and they say, I did feel somewhat, like things were different. I think sometimes what we might do is we might take it personal. Because we know that our intent was not to treat them differently, right? And I think that we can become comfortable with accepting that there are times when people have a certain view of us or a certain view of a situation or circumstance that really truly in our heart wasn't the case, but that's how they felt.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
That's very important because if someone says that they've had this experience, it doesn't mean that I intended for them to have the experience.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I, with a sinister laugh, woke up and said, let me give them an experience so that they feel like I'm favoring. So it doesn't mean that at all.
Yeah.
They are merely sharing what they have felt. And I don't have to deny that.
Or defend it.
Or defend against it in order to change what their perception is. All I have to do is listen. Yeah.
Listening is powerful because sometimes we listen because we feel like we need to fix it, right? But we don't always, first of all, we can't fix anything. It has happened. At best, what we can do is address it, but sometimes all it takes is just listening. To let what a person or that child is processing come out in their own way, and healing can take place.
Yeah, some of the other complications that are faced with children who are a little bit older, maybe 6, 7, 8, who are going into a blended family situation. How do children process this? Because oftentimes they are not really considered.
Oh, wow. We shared this on a previous episode. We talked about divorce, right? Divorce is a reality, and it happens. While it is unfortunate and it was not intended necessarily, right, by God, yet we live in a world where we have to face it, right? And children oftentimes are put in a situation where people don't feel like they need to engage the child. We talked about how some children are sent away, while divorces are taking place, and then they come home and they find out, which is such a horrible experience you can imagine for a child. But the talk about divorce or separation, for a child is an important one that should be had because they have questions.
Right.
They have questions, little ones. Imagine Little people. What do you imagine a little child might be interested in knowing?
Yeah, am I ever going to see my mom or my dad again? Right? Am I ever going to see them again? Or, who am I going to live with?
Ooh, that's a big
And let
one.
me just say this, having been in a blended family.
Yeah.
Man, it is the most confusing thing for parents to come and ask a child, who do you want to live with?
Oh, wow.
I mean, imagine the space that this child is put in. It's like, but I love both.
Yeah.
I love my mom and my dad. Like, what if I choose to live with my mom? Is my dad gonna feel like I don't love him? If I choose to live with my dad, is my mom gonna feel like I don't love her? Like, what? That space, and I've actually experienced that.
Yeah.
That space is a very conflicting space to be put in because we haven't talked and because we haven't explained to the children. Listen, choosing to live with one or the other, it doesn't mean that you don't love.
Yeah.
Right, your friends may be here. It may be closer to a school that you're comfortable attending, and so forth and so on. But we can put children in some very difficult situations, and all of these are questions that they might have.
Yeah, I remember as a child, because again, my parents divorced when I was 9, but they remarried when I was 19. We'll talk about that next season. But yeah, and I remember as a child, knowing that I had a grandmother, right, my father's mother, and there were times when I was allowed, right, to go and visit because my mom and my grandmother didn't get along too well. God took care of that, praise be to God. But as a child, it was rough, and there were times when I felt guilty for enjoying myself with my grandmother, and there were times when I felt like I was betraying my mother.
Wow.
And so, and again, you may be thinking, well, why would you do that? Because children process when no one's talking to them about it. They're going to find a way to process. And so I carried a lot of guilt when I would go and spend time with that side of the family.
Yeah. That's amazing. Just the way that children process. I think another question that children might have, especially when one of their parents is entering into a new relationship. Who is this person?
Yes.
How do they feel about me? Will they like me? Are they going to be mean to me?
Oh my goodness. One time I remember I was on social media, it was Facebook post, a friend of mine posted, and it was in reference to her having a question about a really good friend of hers. She was disturbed because her friend was actually getting ready to get married. And her friend had made a comment that said, it's not about my kids, I deserve happiness. You know what I'm saying? They'll get over it. Kids, they'll bounce back, right? And I thought, wow, what an interesting way to look at making such a decision in life, that it doesn't even need to involve the child at all. It's just about my happiness. When is my turn going to come? It's about me, And I thought to myself that that's devastating, to think that a child, people make decisions to be with people and their children don't even know them.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
They don't have a relationship with that individual, and mommy or daddy are getting ready to get married, and I just need you to know this is happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a fascinating thing. It reminds me of my father. I remember when my father was getting ready to marry my stepmom.
Yeah.
I remember he sat my brother and I down, and he asked us, and we had spent time with my stepmom. And, he asked us, what do you think? How do you feel about her? Are you guys comfortable with her? And I remember feeling like, is he really asking me? But he really wanted to know. And that was looking back on it, I think that was a wise thing for him to do.
Yeah.
And my stepmom is just really the greatest treasure
He really is,
ever. Yeah. Been a rich and tremendous blessing and encouragement to my life. But I remember that conversation and the importance of it. Now, I think some people might hear, well, listen, they're too young and they don't need, every situation is different.
Yeah.
But recently we were how should I say this? We were exposed to the opposite end of that. What happens when you have parents who are later on in life a spouse dies
Yeah.
and those parents remarry.
Yeah.
And
They don't have babies. They have grown
they
children.
have grown children and grandchildren.
Yeah.
And now the grown children and grandchildren have to accept another person into their life. Here's the fascinating thing that we've seen as we've watched this play out is that oftentimes, you know, listen, you know, I've lived my life, I've raised you guys,
Yeah.
and now this is something that I want to do.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but it's a fascinating perspective at the other end of life.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because there are blended families that don't just happen with small children,
Yes.
but blended families that happen with adult children and grandchildren.
And again, when we talk, right, no matter what stage of life we're in, there are going to be challenges, correct? And when we talk about those challenges, allowing those conversations to happen, they can actually help the process
Yes.
to go much more smoothly, right? Much more smoothly. I have to say that I am grateful for my dad. My mom had 2 children prior to her marrying my father, and he loves my brothers like they are his own, right? And I appreciate that. I think about your family. I always said that I admired your family, and I'm talking about both spectrums, your stepdad and your stepmom, because they love you all, and you just would never be able to tell, you know what I'm saying, that there is this step situation, and that's actually not a word that's used.
It's not even a word that's used.
Yeah, it's not a word that's used, and neither in my home either. My brothers are not my father's stepsons; they are his sons. You know, so I thank God for people who are mature enough to go through these processes, because it takes maturity.
Yeah.
And it takes healing.
It takes healing. Yeah, we're gonna get to there, but there are some practical things that we want to share with
Yeah.
our friends that will help with the blended family experience.
Yes.
And one of the first practical steps that we want to share is tell your children the truth.
The truth.
Don't lie to your children.
Now, again, we understand that we're talking about being age appropriate, right? So based on where the child is age-wise, mentally, and emotionally, right? That is how you're going to address these truths in their life. But nonetheless, tell them the truth.
And let me just share how complicated that might be, because every blended family doesn't come because of a divorce. Some, as we suggested earlier, they come on the heels of the death
Yes.
of a spouse.
Yeah.
And just imagine someone who says to their child or their children, well, you know, daddy or mommy is gone away, or they're in a better place. And then the child sees the living spouse get into a relationship, and the child is thinking, but if daddy or mommy is only gone away, it means they're gonna come back. So then why are you pursuing a relationship when mommy or daddy is supposed to come back? Like they're not gonna like this,
Yeah.
right? So in an attempt to soothe what a child is going through, and I'm talking about dealing with death here, we are not telling them the truth. We lie to them,
Yeah.
and then it complicates
Yes.
things moving forward.
Now, that's not the only lie we can tell our children.
What are some of the other lies?
You know, we can tell our children to make ourselves look better, right? We can tell our children, you know, well, daddy didn't want you, right? Daddy didn't want us, right? Unfortunately, or mommy, because there are mothers who leave, right? Mommy didn't want us anymore, so it's just us. And it's like, well, is that the truth? Right? Would that parent actually say that to that child, or is there some other complicated, situation happening between conflicts within the relationship?
Right. I think another principle, along with telling the truth, and of course, as you say, age appropriateness and whatnot, but another principle is for us to heal ourselves. So before I enter into a blended family,
Yes.
I must heal from the family that I'm exiting from for whatever reason, be it death, divorce, whatever the case may be. So if I'm not healed from that, or in the process of healing,
Yeah.
and I'm entering into another relationship, another marriage even, then that has some things, which we'll talk about in another episode.
Yeah. You can bring in some bitterness and some resentment. Yeah, we'll talk about
Right,
it.
which actually feeds more into telling our children the truth. If I'm not healed, then the way, and this is, I guess this is another principle, the way that we talk to our children about their other parent.
Yes.
If we talk in a negative way, which so many of us do,
Yes.
sometimes it's not even intentional. It's just, this is us telling our story.
And it's the pain
Right,
that's
and the
coming
pain
up.
of my story paints the other individual in a negative light. And but everything that we say negative about the other individual is actually undermining the well-being and health of the child.
I'm so grateful when I think back to my parents. I shared in previous episodes, my father was an alcoholic. He was a generational alcoholic for years. And living in the home with the alcoholic, he could be abusive and life was just rough, you know. But when my parents divorced when I was 9, one of the things I'm so thankful that my mother never did, my mother never verbally bashed my father to me. Now, she had every right to, right? But she didn't. And I would dare say when my father got sober and his life changed, that helped in the process of us reconciling as daughter and father, you know? So I appreciate that. And if you're a parent who is going through that situation, it can be rough. You know, my hat goes off to my mom who experienced a lot of abuse, but she never did that. And I want to encourage you, where at all possible, go get help. If you need to get that stuff out, go talk to a counselor. You know what I'm saying? Go talk to an adult or someone who can help you to process through what you've been through. You know, because by God's grace, if change comes to that parent's life and they heal and they want to reconcile with that child, it will be really difficult, you know, to do if that has happened.
Yeah, another principle we have under the banner of communicating truth is when we tell our story, we should be careful to communicate more about ourselves and less about the other person. What do I mean when I say that? What could I have done better, different, or more?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this allows me to express my feelings rather than, you know, investing the other person's actions with various emotions and feelings that, quite frankly, they may not have, right? So we communicate about ourselves. The other principle is don't block parenting opportunities. Now, why do we say don't block parenting opportunities? But first, let me say this, because there are laws of the land that say if the child is in danger.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
If the child is in danger or you feel like,
absolutely.
there's something that's going to jeopardize their safety, then of course you don't want to trust your child into that situation. But there are some people where that's not the case. That doesn't exist. But there's this idea of just dismissing and getting rid of this portion, this past thing in my life, and I'm going to start a different life. Why do we say don't block parenting opportunities?
Well, because we were created to have both of our parents by God's grace. We understand that there are circumstances and situations that make that impossible to happen, right? Protect your children from abusive situations. Maybe the parent has, you know, there's a lot of different things that take place. But removing the other parent does not make me a better parent. It's hard out here. And even we're married and it's hard raising children. And so we're in as far as possible, be at peace with all men, right? So that that child can be raised in an environment where they can have wholeness and health, right? Blocking a parent from actually being a parent does not help the child. It hinders the process of them being a healthy adult.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And the other thing, we've mentioned this several times now, that's operating on the theory of replacing the loss.
Yes.
So he or she is no longer in your life, but you don't need them because now there's this other person that's going to be in your life and they are in place of this father or this mother. But what have we said over and over again? You cannot replace another person, no matter how hard we may try or desire to, we cannot replace a loss.
Yeah. I mean, this is powerful, and I can't help but to think of the story of Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. It is watching what they went through in Scripture. You know, my mind goes to Ishmael, how he must have felt, being sent away, or his mom being sent away, and the angst. And it's not that God didn't care about him. You know that God promised to take care of him.
And bless him.
Right, but that wasn't the ideal of what God had intended for him to go through. And so there may be somebody watching this now feeling like Ishmael, or maybe feeling like Sarah, or feeling like Abraham, or even like Hagar, like, man, how in the world are we going to handle this mess of a situation? Listen, you can. By God's grace, it takes maturity. It takes honesty.
Healing.
It takes healing. Listen, and your healing is the catalyst to your children being healed.
Now, our children don't need us to heal.
They don't need us, but boy, oh boy, does it help the process in the future.
Now you can watch episodes of When We Talk with Stephen and Tamara Conway anytime at 3abnplus.tv or on our 3ABN Plus app for smartphones and tablets.
Discover the keys to healthier family relationships and better communication. Just visit 3abnplus.tv or download the app and search for When We Talk. Put your feet on the path to relationships like God intended them to be.
The blending. It's really actually good news. It's good news. In Malachi chapter 4, one of the encouragements actually about these last days that we're living in is that God would turn the hearts of the fathers towards the children and the hearts of the children to the fathers. This is one of the last day promises that God makes towards us. And then there's another passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 11 and 12. And it says in the context that two are better than one. Now, this doesn't mean that a single parent cannot do the job. Certainly single parents have and can do a wonderful job of raising a child or children. But the Bible makes the point that two are better than one. But it doesn't stop there. It says in verse 12 that a threefold cord is not easily broken. And I believe that we can apply this to the blended family, where there's more than one parent, more than two parents, there's three or even more parents. And the Bible presents the possibility of a stronger cord, a stronger foundation for a child or children that comes from more input, more love, more investment, more honesty, more ears to listen, So if you're in a blended family, we want to encourage you today that your family, God has purposed to bless. Your family is going to be a wonderful proving ground for young men and young women who will do a mighty work for the Lord. And God wants to change you in the process as well. Just keep talking, because remember, when we talk, we heal.